Zach Wilson is a Denver Broncos quarterback, and we are going to tell you why that doesn't eliminate them from going with a QB in round one of this week's NFL Draft. You're going to get that and much more on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Broncos Country? Welcome into a brand new episode of Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country for making us your first listen of the day every single day for all your Broncos news, content, coverage, and more. This is the place to be because you can get us for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Do us a favor, hit that subscribe or that follow button so you never miss out on what's going on with your favorite team every single day, all year long. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by Sayre Bedinger, site expert over there, predominantlyorange.com. And as always, the Broncos keep us in the content cycle. It's churning and churning ahead of the NFL Draft. We've all been talking about, will the Broncos go with a quarterback in round one of the 2024 NFL Draft? Well, the Broncos just went with a quarterback via trade in the days building up to the NFL Draft, acquiring former Jets quarterback, first-round pick, second overall, Zach Wilson in the 2021 NFL Draft. They acquired him with a late-round pick swap. And Sayre, I think the number one question we got to ask, and really to kick off the meat and bones of today's episode of the show, a lot of people are wondering, is the addition of Zach Wilson via trade, does that take the Broncos out of going with a quarterback potentially in round one of the NFL Draft? What does this do for them going into Thursday?
I don't think it takes them out of the round one quarterback market, but I do wonder, is that what they want other teams to think, right? Are the Broncos sending a signal here on Monday saying, look, we don't feel like the quarterback that we want is going to be available at 12. Darn it. You know, we're kind of, it's kind of our resignation plan. We've decided, you know what, we'll make the trade for Zach Wilson now. We know we're not going to get our guy at 12. Maybe that's what they want people to think, right? Maybe there's a little reverse psychology happening here, but ultimately, Cody, I think you can't help but wonder, does this mean best player available at 12 overall? As we heard George Payton talk about, we feel like we're going to get a really good player at 12 overall. I think the non-quarterback noise may start to get a lot louder here ahead of Thursday's draft for the Broncos. Not that Zach Wilson necessarily prevents you from taking a quarterback, but look, they obviously, this is a contingency plan in case you don't get your guy, or in case you do want to move around the board and say maybe go after Bo Nix later on. I think that's what it really frees up the Broncos to do, right? Is to say, hey, we got a couple guys that we've said we believe Jarrett Stidham can start. You know, now we're putting Zach Wilson in the mix. Sean Payton historically been great with reclamation projects. Maybe the Broncos are saying, like, all right, you want the 12th overall pick to come up and get a corner or an offensive tackle or maybe a Brock Bowers? Come and give us some picks that we want, and we can still maneuver around round one and get Bo Nix or Michael Penix Jr. if that's their guy.
Well, I think that probably presents a more likely case, right? You know, you mentioned it. I think the addition of Zach Wilson, it shouldn't eliminate the Broncos from going with the quarterback, whether that's round one or whether that's the later rounds. Here's what I believe is probably going to be the more realistic option here for Denver, Sayre. I think, as you mentioned, other positions, other players now, there's an opportunity to be had. Look, you go back to the 2019 NFL Draft, what happened? The Broncos had a pretty decent pick in that year's draft, but they traded down with the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think Denver moved back, if I'm not mistaken. Didn't they move back to the 19th overall pick? They got tight end Noah Fant, but they required an additional second-round pick where they ended up getting Dalton Risner and Drew Lock. Not going to be a similar situation, but Denver could ideally in this situation here. Teams are interested in trading up. There are some teams behind Denver that obviously are interested in that. Let's say hypothetical situation. One of those teams calls. They want Denver's 12th pick, but in exchange, like Denver's obviously going to get whatever first-round pick that they have in the later rounds or maybe even in the 20s of the NFL Draft. But in order to move up to 12, you also got to give us your second-round pick, which gives Denver some flexibility as well. Maybe they can use their third-round pick if there's a guy that even if they get a second-round pick, they want to trade up for, if it's a late second-round pick, to maybe move up a little bit closer. You have ammunition to be able to do that with, I think, out having to give up some of your key players, as you know, some of those scenarios have been floated out there. So for me, maybe Denver goes edge rusher. Maybe they go cornerback, receiver, or offensive tackle with their first-round pick, but they also get a second-round pick, and maybe they go with the guy, as you mentioned, Bo Nix. To me, that makes that a little bit more likely here. I'm excited about it because now you add another quarterback to that room as well. You have 2 former first-round picks in there competing with a guy like Jarrett Stidham, who has some NFL experience. I do like that as well. And look, Diana Rossini of ESPN mentioned earlier this week that there could be more fireworks on the way here for the Broncos. This was after the uniform reveal had happened there. I don't know if this is the firework move that she was talking about. And if it is, it might be a little bit of a sparkler, in my opinion, potential low risk, high reward option. But there's so much we'll also have to break down regarding how this is going to work out for Denver. I think you now enter the NFL draft with 8 total picks. I mean, obviously for Denver, they were able to swap with New York, their 6th-round pick for their 7th. And now you have ammunition to be able to do a little bit of everything and maybe build up the offensive arsenal in this year's NFL draft, depending on what you decide to do here. I can't wait to see what Denver has done. But let's be very clear here. Broncos country, them trading for Zach Wilson should not take them out of the running here for a quarterback in the first round of the 2024 NFL draft on Thursday. And obviously, Sayre Bedinger, myself, we're going to have you covered every step of the way because it is going to be a wild and raucous week here for Broncos country. But we also have to ask ourselves the question here, what does the Broncos quarterback room look like? Could Zach Wilson be a starter here for Denver in 2024 if they're looking at this as an option and maybe not going quarterback in round 1? You're going to get that and much more on today's brand new episode of Locked On Broncos. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. And as you all know, FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. It's playoff time right now in the NBA. If you're a Colorado sports fan, the Denver Nuggets, they're in the playoffs right now against the Los Angeles Lakers. And FanDuel makes it exciting for the playoffs because you can bet on player props like Nikola Jokic getting a triple-double. You can put the Nuggets on the money line. You can choose point spreads and more. Or if you're a Colorado Avalanche fan, the NHL playoffs are also here, and the Avs are on the ice. Even though they're down 0-1 right now in their series, they have a chance to maybe storm back. Do the odds increase for the Avs to maybe come back and win this series? You can get it on the action on FanDuel Sportsbook because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, that's secure, and super easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. Today's Locked On Broncos podcast is also brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. And as you all know, Game Time, they're now an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even easier and faster. And the really cool thing about this now being a thing for Game Time is that tickets, the cost of them actually get a little bit lower as the first pitch nears. So you can even wait till after the first pitch is thrown out to maybe find great deals. If you want to go watch a Colorado Rockies game to enjoy the atmosphere at Coors Field, well, you can go do that. Enjoy good time and company with friends. Good atmosphere overall in a game day environment over there for the Colorado Rockies. But the one thing I'll tell you I really like about the Game Time app, not only do you get the best prices and the best deals available, but you also can see what the best view is going to be from wherever you're going to purchase your ticket. Game Time, they have a panoramic view of all the action, so you know what to expect when you go in and you find your seats on game day or for your comedy, theater, music events that are going on near you. So check it out with the Game Time app. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Sean Payton finally has a reclamation project in Denver. We've been clamoring for this. Now Zach Wilson is coming back to the mountainous West, hopefully to reclaim the promise that he once had as the BYU starting quarterback. Will he start for the Denver Broncos, though? That's what Cody and I are going to talk about on today's episode of Locked On Broncos as we cover yet another exciting move by this team. Cody and I, we're going back to back recording podcasts and streams. We're talking all things Denver Broncos, and you don't have to miss out either. Follow along anywhere and everywhere that you get your podcast for free, as well as you can watch the show to see some of our reactions because, quite frankly, Cody, this is a week of, there's really no middle ground. You're going to be reacting to what the Broncos do, uniforms, Zach Wilson, the NFL draft. You can come watch us react to those things on YouTube as well if you haven't already. But let's talk about this, Cody. As I said, Zach Wilson, he's returning to the mountainous West where he played his college football there at BYU. in the great state of Utah. Now we got to talk about Zach Wilson as the Broncos' potential QB1 going into 2024. I mean, it's not off the table. People may laugh that off. People may write it off. I don't think that there's anything about this move that says that the Broncos don't believe, as Sean Payton, if anyone, I think he believes he can turn him into a starter. What say you to that idea?
Well, I think, you go back to Sean Payton's first year in Denver. Obviously, he had a lot of comments about Nathaniel Hackett. And you look at that, and obviously the comments, they were very hard. Like they took a lot of he took a lot of criticism for them overall regarding how Hackett was with Russell Wilson. Well, obviously there's a, difference how things were with Zach Wilson and Nathaniel Hackett. To me, for Denver, low risk, high reward type of opportunity. I mean, you're talking about a former first round pick who went second overall. Granted, that year's quarterback class, when you look back on it in hindsight, doesn't look the greatest overall, maybe outside of Trevor Lawrence, which there's still some questions there. It's not necessarily a question of Trevor. It's a question of, are the Jaguars going to be the sustainable destination for him forever? But you look at Zach Wilson here. This is an opportunity for Sean Payton to kind of rub it in the face of Nathaniel Hackett and maybe Robert Saleh in that coaching job, because Zach was a guy that obviously has made a lot of really bad plays during his 3 years with the New York Jets. But I do feel like we'd be remiss if we do not talk about it. Obviously, last year when Aaron Rodgers went down, Zach Wilson had a 4-7 starting record as the quarterback. And I remember the one thing, we were all tuned into it. It was that Sunday night football game, the Jets versus the Kansas City Chiefs. And I tell you what, I watching Zach Wilson that game, he was making some plays that I was like, hey, this is interesting. Like, I haven't seen this guy play like this in the NFL before. Throwing with anticipation, standing clean in the pocket, using his legs to pick up a first down against what we all know was a very good defense in Kansas City. And all of a sudden, like, Zach was starting to get some confidence bringing him. But there were so many different ups and downs with the New York Jets. They had one of the worst offenses in all of football. I don't necessarily think that's a product of Zach Wilson, though he's part of that offensive environment from Nathaniel Hackett. There were questions, I think, aplenty about it. But for a guy like Sean Payton, for George Payton to go out there and make this trade, tells me that they believe that maybe they can get something out, right? If he's not going to be a starter, he's at least going to add value to a competition in that quarterback room alongside Jarrett Stidham. Now, I think we talked about as well, we're on the board saying, hey, the addition of Zach Wilson should not eliminate the Broncos for going with the quarterback in this year's NFL draft. However, I do want to ask you this question here. If Denver doesn't feel good about this year's quarterback class, where they're at, and they don't plan on doing that, is adding Zach Wilson to the mix to compete with Jarrett Stidham the best case scenario and allows Denver to maybe explore opportunities beyond just 2024 at the quarterback position? Where do you fall in this conversation? Because I still think there's a lot of things that we got to read. And when we talk about the tea leaves here.
Yeah, I think there is a lot going on with this move. Of course, Sean Payton mentioned Zach Wilson earlier this offseason by name at the Super Bowl, actually, at the media week at the Super Bowl. Somebody asked him, who's the most unfairly hated on quarterback in the NFL? And he was like, he was kind of trying to get clarity on the question. The reporter gave him some clarity, and he mentioned first Zach Wilson. So it's kind of fascinating how deep this goes back in terms of Payton mentioning him by name and maybe having him on the radar very early in the offseason, because we know he loves to go after the reclamation projects. And Zach Wilson, he's only 24 years old. He's going to be 25 in August. So he's still only 24, which a lot of the incoming rookie quarterbacks, they're going to be 24 as rookies as well. So he's already got years that he's been able to take his lumps in the NFL. And I'm not sitting here trying to sell ice to an Eskimo or anything like that, Cody, but I feel like, man, this is a really great, like you said, low risk, high reward move. Zach Wilson already has a lot more experience starting than does Jarrett Stidham, and he has more experience starting in high stakes games. As you talked about last year, I mean, the Jets were still in the playoff mix deep into the season. And so I think that there's a lot of experience. He's played really well against the Broncos a couple of times.
Yeah.
I mean, at least well enough for the Jets to beat Denver twice. So to me, I look at this move, I see it as you get a guy who was the second overall pick in the 2021 NFL draft. The ink may still be drying on the scouting report in terms of whatever the Broncos thought of Wilson in a draft class where they had no shot at getting him, where they got PS2 with the 9th overall pick. So maybe George Payton and this scouting department loved Zach Wilson that year as well. And this is a unified decision to say, all right, these quarterbacks are going for next to nothing. And we know the Broncos did take a look at Sam Darnold. They took a look at Sam Howell before he was traded to the Seattle Seahawks. Now you get Zach Wilson in the fold. You've got a talented guy with a chip on his shoulder who's going to come in and compete. what more could you ask for? Nobody's being forced to buy his jersey at the team store. Nobody's being forced to put all the eggs in the Zach Wilson basket. But you got a guy this talented and still young with Sean Payton as his head coach to be able to compete. That, to me, Cody, is a risk worth taking.
And I would say right now, when you look at Denver's quarterback roster before this move, it was Jarrett Stidham and Ben DiNucci. I mean, I don't think anyone out there can say that this move makes that quarterback room worse. I think it makes the quarterback room a little bit better because of his experience. Now, look, Zach Wilson, you're already seeing it on social media. You're seeing it from the Jets fan base. You're seeing it from other fan bases that are laughing at Denver. We just got to wait for this one to play out, right? Like, Zach has a chance to come in and to compete for the starting job. He's got the experience to do so, but it's not going to just be handed to him, right? Like, there's going to be different variables that get thrown into the mix here. How does he respond to Sean Payton? Is he in a better environment right now offensively in terms of maybe where he's coming into than New York? Like, even though that New York had one of the worst offenses in football last year from a production and point scoring standpoint, I would also say that they also moved the ball and put up some more offensive numbers. They had a more sustainable run game in some aspects than Denver did offensively last year. So how can you bridge the two together, right? This isn't a move that we're saying is going to take the Broncos to the next level, but this is a move that gives them a piece that's going to elevate, I'd say, the floor and the ceiling really in that room, and still gives you the opportunity to add to the position room to increase the overall volume of competition, which ultimately Sean Payton and the Broncos want to have the best option. So how do you do that? You throw a couple of guys in there, maybe even 3 guys, depending on if they go that path in the NFL draft, and you say, you know what, we're going to find out who of this group of people is going to, come out ahead in it, whether that's Jarrett Stidham with his lack of overall NFL starting experience, or it's going to be Zach Wilson with plenty of NFL starting experience, who's taken his lumps, former first-round pick, potentially another first-round pick in this year's draft, or maybe even a round 2 selection if Denver does trade down. It gives Denver options, which I think is the most important thing when we talk about the QB position, because before this move, didn't look very promising. It looked like Denver was going to have to maybe do whatever they can to just add another quarterback to the room. Now they have some breathing room, I think, to expand the roster a little bit further.
And you get a kind of a dynamic guy. I mean, Zach Wilson's pretty good on the move, pretty good with his legs as well. So he gives you a little bit of a dual threat at the position. I, for one, am fascinated to see how this works out, Cody. To me, it's one of those types of moves where if it doesn't work out, oh well, you did a late round pick swap to get him. But if it works out, Sean Payton's going to look like an absolute genius for making this trade when he did, especially after everybody else went through the line. It feels like the Broncos were last in line for the quarterback position this year in terms of adding anybody. I mean, I feel like every team added a quarterback before the Broncos, and now you get Zach Wilson, one of the most talented guys available. I know that people are going to, they're going to say, well, you can't overhype Zach Wilson too much. We're not really trying to do that. But no. Again, when a guy changes franchises like this, you freshen up the scouting report. You say, all right, what is the best of what this guy brings to the table? And how can we continually get the best out of him? That's how roster builders and team builders in the NFL think. They don't think in terms of the way that fans do when they look at what he's done in New York and say, there's nothing there. He's a draft bust. He's been in the league for 3 seasons, folks. I mean, let's give the guy an opportunity. He's not even 25 years old left. Let's see what he can do with some better coaching, which the Denver Broncos do have. I like this idea, Cody. I like the direction for the Broncos and Zach Wilson. Intriguing addition to the quarterback room.
I also like the pairing with Davis Webb here in the quarterback coaching side of things here for the Broncos going forward. We'll see if this impacts their draft plans. And look, Broncos Country, it's been a busy week here already. Make sure you stay tuned here to Locked On Broncos every step of the way. But that'll wrap up today's breaking news episode of the show. Denver adding Zach Wilson into the mix. Late round pick swap, low risk, high reward. That's how we're feeling about it. We want to know how you feel about this move as well. So let us know if you're listening or watching Locked On Broncos wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you tomorrow for a brand new episode of the show.